Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Chaos Head Noah running on Nintendo Switch.
このボケナス、ずっと待ってたんだからね。あなたのことなんか大嫌い。でも大好き。
I absent-mindedly watched Sedaton move around my monitor. The final episode of Bloodtoon had aired late last night. The story had readily picked up by the end, and Achan had reviewed it highly. This was my third time watching it, but I wasn't able to focus on it at all. I looked at the clock. It was past 10 p.m. Rimi had left around 8. She cheered me up and given me kind words of encouragement. Having her here made me feel less lonely than I had been for the past week. But Rimi didn't seem to think things were as serious as they really were. It was as if she was trying to avoid any talk about NewGen. Maybe she thought I was annoying? She'd said somebody she knew had been hurt during the earthquake. Maybe she was busy dealing with that and didn't have time for me. No, but maybe I was paranoid, sure, but I was still in danger. I could be killed at any moment, even right now. There had to be some reason why Shogun was so obsessed with me. If I could figure it out, maybe it would give me some clue as to how to fight back.
そういえば、あのおじさん、別れ際にこんなこと言ってたのら。中でも一番特別なのは、その目、誰の目を産み落とした少年。
Whose eyes are those? You couldn't go anywhere in Shibuya without hearing those words now, and online everybody even started using it as the killer's name. I've been using that phrase since I was a little kid. Shogun must have known that, and this was his way of sending me a message, or maybe challenging me. When did I start using that phrase? I felt like somebody had said it to me. I vaguely remember writing it in an essay I'd done in elementary school. I made it the title, Whose Eyes Are Those? I could barely remember what the essay was about. Now I wanted to know. What had I written in it? Did they still have it at home? It was so old they'd probably thrown it out years ago. But I'd always had a habit of putting important things in a big empty box of candy I'd kept. I'd call it my treasure box. There was a chance it was still there. What should I do? Should I head home and check? But I didn't want to have to face Nanami. I wouldn't know what to say.
僕はどうしようもなくヘタレだ。
I slowly stood up from my chair and then went over and collapsed on the sofa.
あなた、なんでここにいんの？これは違うんだからね。私は別にさ、立ち食いそばが好物なわけじゃないさ。何ニヤニヤしてんの？このボケナス。もう怒った。うなれ！侍コンデンサー！
I looked up at the ceiling, half listening to Seta's dialogue. The ceiling was made of cold, exposed steel. There was nothing like knots in the wood grain for me to look at and pretend I was seeing a human face. Suddenly, in the corner of my eye, I saw a metal box with a design I recognized mixed in with the boxes of H games on my bed in the loft.
あれって。
I leapt off the sofa and went up to the little ladder to look at the bed. A square reddish-brown box, about the size of a B5 sheet of paper. Written on the lid was the word Sable. This was it, my treasure box. I must have brought it from home. I didn't remember bringing it at all, but good job, me. I brought it down from my bed and opened the lid. It was filled with old tests, essays, and scraps from my sketchbook. Most of it was papers and just a few tiny objects. I took them all out of the box and began to rummage through them. I found what I was looking for almost immediately. After all, it was at the very top. An old faded essay. The handwriting on the title was awful. Was there some important secret message hidden here, within the words? Something that Shogun was obsessed with? What did the homeless man mean when he said, most special? I gulped and began to read, careful not to miss a single word. Whose eyes are those? By Takumi Nishijo, Class 4-3. I dream a lot. In my dream, I'm a grown-up and I get in a time machine and go see myself in the present. The grown-up me doesn't look like me at all. Also, there are a lot of buttons in the time machine. One turns on a shower, one gives you shampoo. I asked the grown-up me how it works and he said it can go to caveman times or dinosaur times. He asked me what was my worst class and I said math. He said there's even a switch that will make you good at math. I tried to flip the switch and he got mad. He said I need to study harder instead. The grown-up me only got mad the one time and other than that, he was nice. He told me which girl I'm going to marry and stuff too, but that's a secret. I also asked about God. He said God's real. I think he's real too. Mom said that God sees everything, so if I do bad stuff, he'll send me to hell. So I think I shouldn't do any bad stuff at all. I need to be nice to my little sister too. Mom said when you do bad things, it's not God that sees it and comes for you, but the scary man. The scary man is the whose eyes are those monster. If he looks at you, you go to hell. God's eyes and the whose eyes are those eyes are everywhere, and there are lots of them. They're in the sky, and on the ceiling, and walls, and at school. So I need to study a lot and do lots of good things, I think. But since they're always watching, it's embarrassing to go to the toilet or take a bath. Also, ever since I was little, when I'm not sleeping and I just close my eyes, I'll sometimes dream. My mind is like a game, or a manga. But when I do that, the whose eyes are those comes, and so I don't want to do it. I asked Mom, and she said never do it. But even when I'm writing this essay, I ask grown-up me in my dream about the time machine, and he says he knows about it, but I'm a kid, so he wouldn't tell me. So from now on, I want to do lots of good things so I can beat the whose eyes are those monster. The end. Oh, that makes zero sense.
なんだかよくわからないな。
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. About the only thing I got out of reading the essay was that even back then, I'd been able to sense the gaze of God. Maybe I really was a weird kid. It seemed impossible to get anything out of this bizarre essay. It'd be easier to decipher hieroglyphics. Then I noticed some scribblings on the back of the paper. I remember that back then I'd love to scribble on things. Whenever there was a picture of some important old guy in my social studies textbooks, I'd always give him a funny-looking mustache or sunglasses, and I'd love to make little flipbook manga in the corners of my notebooks. I started to have more and more fun drawing. One time I'd even had them buy me a sketchbook. Nobody had ever told me I was good at drawing, though. I flipped over the paper to look at the scribbles, smiling a little as I remember the past. And what I saw was incomprehensible scribblings. Incomprehensible with one exception. There was something I'd seen very recently.
IR2
Was it a formula? Something else? Maybe just a meaningless combination of letters and numbers. I couldn't tell. But it was the same formula Shogun had shown me in the chat when he'd first made contact with me. Whose eyes are those, and IR2? Both of them were written on the back of this essay that I'd written many years ago. One of them I'd even forgotten myself. So if Shogun knew it, that meant that he really had been reading my thoughts. Bon was staring closely at a file as he sat in Frieza's meeting room, or rather the small space in their office, surrounded by shelves that served as one. Yua was sitting across from him, looking timid and scared. Every once in a while, she glanced across from him. She looked like a kid showing a parent her report card. Bon was reading the report she'd compiled on Takumi Nishijo and the NewGen cases. It even had the chat log between Takumi and Shogun from the day before the crucified incident. Yua's conclusion was that Takumi was behind the NewGen killings.
すごいわね。これ全部一人で調べたの？
はい、一応。
Yua looked down at her feet as Momose gave her the compliment. She seemed to be staring directly at the ghetto froggy straps on her bag. She was talking to a police detective and the head of a private detective agency. They were professionals at this kind of thing. From their perspective, anything she tried to do on her own would probably just look like a child pretending to be a detective. But both Bon and Momose were impressed at the quality of her report.
なかなかいい着眼点だ。よく調べたな。とりわけこの西条匠の多重性ってのが興味深い。西条匠は多重人格であり、オリジナルとなった西条匠の人格が眠っている時、つまり他の人格が活動中に事件を起こしている。本当に面白いわ。まあでもちょっとばかり現実離れしすぎてるかな。
刑事さんは西条くんのこと犯人だって考えてないんですか？
はっきり言っていいかい？
Yua's face tensed up for a second, and then she nodded.
警察じゃ西条匠は容疑者として見ていない。
へえ、そうなの。
It wasn't just Yua. Momose was surprised too. Bon chuckled a little. He leaned back into his chair and put his hands behind his head.
少なくとも貼り付け事件じゃ西条は白だ。遺体を貼り付けていた杭には指紋がべったり付着しててな。西条の指紋を手に入れて照合してみたんだが全く合致しなかった。
Yua began to turn pale, and her lips started shaking. As the theory she'd believed in so much had collapsed right in front of her face, the first thing she felt was guilt about all the things she said to Takumi.
杭にあった指紋から容疑者についてはほぼ固まってんだ。まだマスコミにも公表してねえけどな。ちなみにそれ諏訪のお手柄だったりする。
諏訪ちゃんは頑張ってるっていうのに、バンちゃんはよくここでのんびりしていられるわね。
実は俺捜査本部から外されたんだわ。
はあ？
本来の捜査サボって G レートのこととか調べてんの上司にバレちゃってな。
From Bon's perspective, there was actually no need for Suwa to call him and tell him about the 7th murder. He'd wanted to tell his junior partner that, but he had missed his chance.
あんたね、もっとうまく立ち回りなさいよ。まあバンちゃんに G レートのことを教えた私にも責任はあるけど。
気にすんなって。それに G レートの件は個人的にも気になってたんだ。まあ西条にしても貼り付け以外の事件じゃまだ捜査線上にいる。もしかするとユアちゃんの推理が正しいかもしれん。
ニュージェネは同一犯による連続殺人事件じゃないって警察は考えてるの？
まだなんとも。ただついさっき第7の事件が起きたようだしな。個人的には犯人は複数いると思ってる。いろいろ喋っちまった。口外したって知られたらクビになっちまう。今のはオフレコな。
He smiled mischievously and put his fingers to his lips.
で、本題なんだが。
Yua was surprised. She was sure that she'd been called here to talk about Takumi.
聞きたいことってのは学校のことなんだよ。ユアちゃんは青井瀬名って子知ってるかい？君の同級生のはずなんだが。
Yua thought a little and then shook her head apologetically.
名前は聞いたことがあるような気がしますけど、話したことはありません。
ああ、そうか。
その人が犯人なんですか？
ああ、全くの別件だ。昨日徹夜したのもその子のこと調べてたからでな。
あんた、さっき女子高生の生態がどうとかって。
Bond gave her a wink. Then he quickly turned back to Yua.
例えば学校でものすごい手品を使う女生徒がいるって噂を聞いたことは？
いえ、ありませんけど。
さっぱり話が見えないわね。何のこと？
例えば何もない空間から剣を取り出すような手品とか。
Yua's face jolted upwards. Her expression was filled with shock.
どうしてそれ？
Bond seemed a little surprised, despite being the one who'd asked the question.
心当たりがあるのかい？
Yua hesitated for a moment before giving him a firm nod.
どこで見た？
駅の近くの地下道です。西条くんと岸本さんが。
フェスだな。それで
Yua gave him a brief description of how she chased after Takumi 2 weeks ago, how she'd gone to the manga cafe to talk to him, how she'd been a little too forceful when talking to him and he'd run away, how she chased them all through Shibuya, how he had eventually lost her, and then, when she was about to give up, she'd seen him and Ayase going into a tunnel.
だから私、その階段の上から二人の様子をこっそり伺っていたんです。二人は階段の一番下で何か話していて。あ、どんなことを話していたかは聞き取れなかったんですけど。そしたら、突然、岸本さんが、剣を何もないところから取り出したんです。すごく大きな剣で、バッグにも入らないような。
まさか。
俺が見たものと同じだな。
え？
俺が見たのは岸本じゃなかったかな。さっき名前を出した葵瀬名っていう少女だ。実は葵が剣を振り回してたっていう目撃証言が渋谷のあちこちから出てる。
その手品、渋谷の若い子たちの間で流行ってるのかしら。
でも、私が見たあれは、手品にはとても見えませんでした。それに、
他にも何か見たの？
信じてもらえるかどうか、わからなくて、誰にも話したことはないんですけど。
Oh, Yua can see this stuff too, so she also potentially has a sword.
あの時、岸本さんは、剣を出しただけじゃなくて、
Yua paused for a moment to wet her dry lips. She didn't seem sure whether or not she should speak. Her gaze was wandering about the room, looking anywhere but at the people in front of her. Oh, but that also means Bond could see the sword. But eventually, she seemed to make up her mind and looked straight at Momose.
二人に、分身したんです。まるで、本当にその場に二人いるみたいでした。私、わけがわからなくて。
There was a heavy silence in the meeting room. None of the three of them seemed to have any idea what to say.
とにかく一体どんな種があるのかわかんねえが、そんな手品みてえな真似ができる連中がこの渋谷には何人かいるらしい。それと岸本綾瀬も葵瀬名も西条匠と接触したことは確認済みだ。これが偶然とは思えねえわけよ。
西条くん。
あの少年の周囲ではどうも現実離れしたことばかりが起きてるような気がする。
Bon remembered what he'd said during his phone call.
怪獣か魔法使いで済ませられるならよっぽどいいけどな。
The other two didn't hear his whisper. Momose had one of her employees bring them tea to break the oppressive silence. She took a sip and sighed. Then she forced a smile and tried to change the subject.
ところで岩ちゃん、そのカバンにぶら下がってるカエル、最近流行ってるんでしょ？
はい。
Yua let out a sigh of relief, glad to be off the subject.
なんて言うんだっけ？
ゲロカエルです。
いろいろ種類が出てるんじゃなかった？ 10 種類ぐらい。
はい。私は、友達からもらっただけなので、詳しくは知らないんですけど。
なんだってこんな手抜き商品が流行るんだろうな。見た目だって俺の方がずっと可愛いぞ。
バンちゃん、寝言は寝てから言いなさい。
冗談だって。
私も、実はどうして流行っているのか、よくわからないんです。
あら、結構可愛いと思うけどね。
ももちゃんの見る目も衰えたな。
世論は私の方が正しいって証明してるじゃない。バンちゃんも買いに行った方がいいわよ。
一体どこへ行けば買えるものなんだ？
ゲロカエルの専門ショップがあちこちにあって。
専門ショップだ？
そこで、金曜日に行列に並べば買えると思います。
金曜日？
毎週金曜日に新しいデザインのものが発売になるんです。好きな子は、コンプリートとか言って全部集めてるみたいで。
Bon and Momose had begun to glance at each other as Yua spoke. Bon was stroking his chin.
金曜か。流行るとは思えないものが流行ってて。G レートは毎週末に上昇する。
まさかバンちゃん。
当たってみる価値はあるかもな。
When I went to school on Thursday, I got an unexpected offer from Misumi to go visit ISA in the hospital. I hadn't thought of that at all, and it had caught me off guard. But for some reason, before I could answer, Rimi had said she wanted to go. I ended up going along with them. Just to be clear, it's not that I was some cold person who didn't care about her. But with the threat of Shogun looming, I didn't have it in me to worry about other people. I don't want to die. Misumi had gone in through the front door, but when we got to the lobby, she didn't seem sure what to do.
どうしたの？
いや、岸本の病室ってどこなんだろうなって思ってよ。
Had he come all this way without actually bothering to check? If so, what an idiot.
ここは外来棟だよ。病棟は隣。そうなのか。
大地、しっかりしてよ。
AH Tokyo General Hospital. This is the hospital I'd come to ever since I was little. I'd just been here a while ago, in fact, so I had a pretty good idea of the basic layout. Suddenly I remembered what happened to Dr. Takashina and let out a small moan the others didn't hear. As Misumi headed for the inpatient rooms, I looked behind me.
で、病棟の何号室だと思う？そんなのわかんないよ。
This was a general hospital with any number of departments in it, I would guess.
多分外科じゃないかな。でももしかすると精神科かも。
When she'd fallen, she hadn't looked like she was that badly injured. And if she was in bad enough shape mentally to try and jump off the building, it was entirely possible they'd put her there. It happened to me after the incident at Ofront for some reason.
タクって物知りだな。
常識でしょ、常識。ね、タク。
Maybe not everybody. I wouldn't have known unless I'd been here so many times. Remy stopped just before we got to the inpatient area.
私、お手洗い行ってくる。先に行ってて。
She waved and headed back towards the outpatient wing. Misumi and I figured out we'd bother the other patients if we wandered around, so we decided to ask about ISA at the nurse's station. Just like I thought, they gave us the number of a room in the psych ward. The room was small and simple in layout. There was one bathroom on the right side of the entrance and a bed near the back. The evening sun was pouring in through the window on the far wall. There was no sign of ISA herself. The bed was unmade, so she must have been here a little while ago.
どこ行ったんだ?
さあ。
The window was open. The wind was blowing into the room, making the white curtains billow. It had been bothering me ever since I came into the room. I felt awful, negative delusions coming on, like she might have jumped out the window. Like if I looked down, I'd see her below, covered in blood, brains splattered on the pavement. I had to see. I walked towards the window with shaking legs, like a man possessed. I stood at the window. The sky was the color of evening. The air was crisp with the scent of fall. What would I see if I looked below? Something terrible? I gulped and very, very slowly leaned out my head and looked below. There was nothing there at all. I couldn't see ISA's body on the ground below. I must have been overthinking things. Relieved, I went to pull my head back inside. Suddenly, I noticed something. The window on the floor below ours, there was a towel there, flapping in the wind. I thought it was just a white towel, but I could see what looked like blue letters on it. The way it was flapping made it hard to read. And I really didn't care about it anyway. Why should I care about the lettering on a towel? But for some reason I found myself trying desperately to read it. And then I looked closely and saw the letter said, "Whose eyes are those? Whose eyes are those?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't look away. And then... an unseen hand pulled the towel inside, as if they'd known I'd seen it just now. No, that was impossible. There was no way that somebody I knew could be occupying the hospital room exactly below this one. And even if somebody who wasn't a patient was waiting there for me, they'd have no way of knowing if I'd look out the window or not. There weren't any security cameras in the room. It was just a coincidence. It had to be. But what if it wasn't? Terrified, I looked back towards the door. Nobody was there. The door was closed. I backed away from the window, feeling scared and creeped out. Don't think about it. Force yourself not to think about it. It's a coincidence. It's just a coincidence. I kept repeating that to myself over and over.
見ろよ、タク。変な本があるぞ。
I looked up in shock when Misumi said my name. He'd taken a book off the shelf and was reading it.
ヌーだぜ、ヌー。この雑誌、まだ続いてたんだな。
New was a magazine that dealt with UFOs, aliens, psychic powers, religions, urban legends, strange phenomena, alien super civilizations, and lost technology. Anything even tangentially related to the occult. It didn't surprise me in the least that a girl who constantly talked about crazy stuff like ISA was reading it.
こっちの文庫本は、何々？グラジオール記黙示録詩編？ファンタジー小説っぽいな。
I'd never heard of the book, but I heard the word gladiel somewhere before. Where was it again? I felt like I had been really recently.
岸本と付き合うとなると、この趣味に合わせないといけねえのか。大変そうだぜ、これは。
Was he still planning on dating ISA somehow? Last time, she shot him down hard.
Huh?
Oh, it's about time he saw that thing. Suddenly, I realized ISA's D-sword was leaning up against the wall. Its shape reminded me of a space battleship you might see in a sci-fi movie. Every time I saw it, I was struck by how cool it looked and the way it combined beauty and cruelty. It wasn't glowing right now. It was just sitting there, but still you could feel its heavy presence. Misumi showed no indication that he saw the sword. I guess normal people really couldn't see them. Maybe if I just took it without telling Ayase, it would be mine then, right? If I could get a D-sword that easily, then all my problems would be solved, right? I gulped and reached out for the weapon with a trembling hand. I went to grab the blade. I thought I'd grabbed it, but my hand passed right through it. I grabbed only thin air. I tried again, but the same thing happened. I couldn't take it. I couldn't even touch it. Was the sword not real booted right now? And since there was no shared awareness of its existence, was it just a delusion of Ayase's? An illusion, a dream, an afterimage.
何やってんだお前。
Misumi was looking at me confused. We waited another 10 minutes, but there was no sign of Ayase. Rimi, who'd supposedly just gone to the bathroom, was nowhere to be seen either. Where had she gone?
リミってこの病室の場所知ってたか？
We'd asked about the room at the nurse's station after splitting up with Rimi. She might be wandering around looking for us.
あいつバカだからな。俺たちみたいに誰かに聞こうって発想がないのかもしんねえぞ。
探しに。
I was nervous without her around. There was no way to know for sure if the hospital was safe. If Shogun was reading my mind, he'd know exactly where I was.
そうだな。待つのも飽きたし、タクもあいつがいないと寂しいだろうからな。なあ、ぶっちゃけリミとはどうなんだ？
え？
付き合ってんのかって聞いてんだよ。お前ら最近結構いい感じじゃね？
付き合ってないよ。
As I spoke, my face flushed. Me and Rimi, dating? I'd had some delusions about the idea, sure. I wasn't into 3D girls, but Rimi was a pretty big part of my life now. But when Rimi had offered to stay by my side, she'd also said this.
そんなの友達だからに決まってるでしょ。
In other words, she saw me as a friend. She'd have no interest in dating a creepy otaku like me, obviously. And Rimi didn't seem like the type who'd want to date anyway. Misumi and I decided to split up and look for her. Misumi checked the floor below, so I went to check the one above us.
Amisha! Roha! Amisha!
I passed by an elderly man in his 50s. He was clearly a patient here. He was slowly staggering down the hallway, calling out for Ami, whoever that was. I ignored him and kept walking. Walking around the hospital didn't really bother me as much as I thought it would. It was probably because I'd been here so many times. Still, the thought that Shogun might appear from behind every corner or open door made my heart race. There were those strange screams I sometimes heard too. They were bad for my heart. The walls and floor of the hallway were all the same off-white color. Some doors were open and some weren't. I peeked inside a few of them to see if Shogun was lurking there. Each room had 2 beds, and I could see human-shaped forms beneath the sheets. Those must have been patients sleeping, but for some reason all of them were turned away from me, and I couldn't see their faces. There weren't many people out in the hallway. There'd been the old man calling for Ami, and then a nurse. They'd been the only 2 I'd seen. I didn't want to stay here for too much longer. I wasn't sure why, but that's how it felt. The air felt heavy. It wasn't unpleasant, and it felt like I didn't belong here. As I kept going forward, I saw that the hallway turned to the right. There must be more rooms down there, I thought, as I nervously rounded the corner. I saw a wall right in front of me. Unlike the off-white of the other walls, this one was painted pure black. For some reason, my heart began to race faster and faster. I couldn't move. My vision began to swim. I thought I was just feeling dizzy and closed my eyes, but when I put my finger on my eyelids, I could feel my eyes twitching beneath them. A cold feeling, like ice, worked its way up to my body from below. I stood there, completely still, forgetting to breathe. I stared at the black in front of me. It felt like it was pulling me, drawing me in. An endless black that continued on for eternity. There was nothing there, but somebody was watching me. I could feel the gaze of God stabbing into the back of my neck. It was far, far worse than it had ever been at the base. Don't look at me. I used every scrap of mental power I had to force my eyes closed. Only then could I breathe. Panting, I stepped back. I lowered my head, turned around, and ran. I headed back to the floor ISA's room was on as fast as I could, stopping to catch my breath only after I'd headed down the stairs. I touched my neck and found it was covered with a thick, sticky layer of sweat. It wasn't just my neck. My whole body was soaked. What the hell was that? Was it Shogun reading my mind? I could still sense the gaze of God. It was still hard to breathe. It was still cold. I felt exhausted. I wanted to go home. I wanted to have Rimi take me back to the base, and then I could stay there and never leave it again. Even if I did manage to find ISA, she'd be annoyed, not happy to see me. Misumi was only here because he was trying to get laid. I was an idiot to play along with it. I should just go home before Shogun and Yua show up. Those two could appear anywhere at any time. They'd be able to find me easily. I couldn't relax anywhere. I headed back to Isa's room. I was staggering, barely able to walk. I had put my hand on the wall for support. Was Misumi back, I wondered? I slowly kept moving forward, praying that he'd managed to find Rimi.
山井さんがまたアミーちゃんっていう名前を呼んでたんですよ。
I could hear the voices of the nurses in front of me. I looked up to see two nurses walking towards me. One was young, the other was a plump older woman.
一体誰のことを探してるのか。
それこの病院に伝わる怪談よ。誰も知らない幻の病室があって、そこにアミーちゃんが入院してるらしいわ。もう何年も前からある噂。
I put my head down and waited for the two of them to pass. I held my breathing so that they couldn't hear how much trouble I was having breathing. I could tell they were looking at me suspiciously, but all I could do was try to ignore them. When they were gone, I started walking again. Somehow I managed to make it to the nurse's station. ISA's room was in front of the nurse's station. I must have passed it. I groaned and wiped the sweat off my forehead. It still felt like somebody was watching me. I could feel a piercing sensation in my chest. My ears were ringing too. It felt awful. It seemed like I might pass out at any moment. I'd been just fine when I got here. What happened to me? I was in so much pain, I just couldn't take it. I decided to get help from one of the nurses at the nurse's station. But there was only one person there. Evidently, she hadn't noticed me. She had her back turned and was muttering something as she worked. There was a clipboard in her hand. She was writing something on the paper it held. Oh, I'd met her before. It was Hazuki, the nurse. That's right. This was the mental ward at Tokyo General Hospital. Of course she'd be here. I talked to her twice in just the last month. Perfect. If she saw me, she'd help me out immediately. Just then, I heard a beeping noise. It sounded important. Hazuki put down her clipboard and flipped a switch in front of her. The beeping noise stopped. Evidently, someone hit the button to call a nurse. She quickly ran out of the nurse's station. She seemed not to notice me. I was suffering so much, just a few feet away from her, and she didn't even see me. I couldn't stand. The vertigo was incredible. Helplessly, I went inside the nurse's station and decided to wait for her to come back. I found the stool she'd been sitting on and sat down on it. My head hurt so bad. It was like an earthquake. It was like the earthquake a week ago. But the pain was different somehow, maybe. I wanted something to drink. I'd been out of breath for so long that even breathing hurt. I took a quick glance around me. I saw the clipboard Hazuki had been writing on. I could see what was drawn on it. Last time I'd seen her, she'd been smiling as she'd written something on it. I thought she was taking down my temperature or the names of the drugs I should be given. So, what was this? I couldn't understand.
これって
I'd seen it somewhere before. I'd seen this terrible drawing somewhere before. Where? Where had I seen it? My head hurt so bad. The stabbing pain. The prickling at the back of my neck. Don't look at me. I picked up the clipboard. There were several papers there, all medical charts. I flipped through them. The second one had the same terrible picture. I flipped the next. The third one was the same. The fourth too, and the fifth, and the sixth. They all had the same picture on them. This picture... It was crucified. The shipping crate that Takumi Nishijo called home was perched silently on the roof of an old building in Shinsen. Sena Aoi was coming here now for the second time. The first had been just a few days prior. She'd run into Takumi and Kozui at Center Street. She'd secretly followed him home. That's how she'd found this place.
セナさん、やめた方がいいと思うのだ。泥棒さんはね、コズピ嫌いなの。にゅー。それなら、どうしてついてきた？
Sena spoke coldly, without even looking back at Kozui. Sena had come here to sneak into Takumi's room. Takumi Nishijo wasn't normal. After talking with him several times, that was the conclusion she reached. He was different from normal gigglomaniacs like Sena and Kozui. Either the strength of his delusions was incredibly intense, or he was receiving some kind of artificial support. Either way, his very existence seemed like it was unstable somehow. Something about him bothered Sena a lot. She was looking for a man named Hatano. And it was possible that Takumi Nishijo was connected to him somehow. She had no way of being sure. But if there was any chance, even a small one, she wouldn't rest until she'd ruled it out with her own eyes. As long as she kept doing that, she'd find her target eventually. That's what Sena believed. There was a padlock on the door. Sena gave a little snort and brought down her D-sword. She'd already real-booted it. The padlock shattered easily.
タクミさんが帰ってきたら怒られちゃうよ。
Sena had already seen that Takumi had left school with two friends heading into the direction of the station. And even if he did find out, she didn't care. Sena would do anything to achieve her goal, even if that meant making somebody mad or having them call the cops. She opened the door and went inside. The place was like a garbage dump. Sena couldn't help but wince and give a small moan.
汚いね。
なんで楽しそうなんだ、小杖。
靴は脱いだ方がいいのかな。
Sena sighed and went inside the room without bothering to remove her shoes.
お人形さんいっぱいなのら。うぷー。たくみさんって変態さんだったんだ。すごいな。
Sena ignored Kozui, who seemed strangely impressed for some reason, and went over to the computer. She turned on Takumi's PC, and while she waited for it to boot up, she ran her eyes across the contents of the desk.
Mm-hmm.
Her eyes narrowed as she picked up an old sheet of essay paper. Whose eyes are those?
その目、誰の目だ。
Kozui had been looking over Sena's shoulder. She was jumping up and down with delight.
やっぱりたくみさんがその目誰の目の人だったのら。コズピーはパンパカパーンだったポーン。
Sena, however, seemed much less interested in the essay than Kozui. She flipped it over to see if anything was written on the other side. Suddenly, her eyes went wide with shock.
これ、
What she saw there was...
人がいっぱいだね。これロボットさん？ IR2 だって。セナさん？
Senna was gritting her teeth so loud that you could physically hear it. Her expression was even angrier than usual, and her hand shook with rage as she held the essay.
そうか。西条が IR2 を生み出した張本人か。
Her voice was quiet. Senna crumpled up the essay into a ball and crushed it with her fist. I got up and left the nurse's station, and now I was wandering around the hospital. My brain still felt like it was full of fog. I decided not to think about it, or think about what I'd just seen. Somehow I ended up in the stairwell. Misumi was there, standing in front of the window.
どうしたタク？汗びっしょりじゃねえか。顔色も悪いし。あ、顔色悪いのはいつもか。もしかして走って探してたのか？そりゃバテもするぜ。無茶するね、お前って。
I wiped away the sweat and tried my best to pretend I was okay.
リミと岸本、見つけたぜ。
But I couldn't see the two of them anywhere. Then, for some reason, he pointed out the window.
あそこだ。
It took a moment to catch my breath before walking over to the window. From the window, I could see the outpatient building next to us. The outpatient and inpatient areas were separate buildings. There was a walkway that led between them, but the two were a distance apart. The inpatient building was a few stories taller, and from the stairwell you could look down on the outpatient building's roof. There was a garden there with a planter filled with red flowers. It was a space for patients to relax. Rimi and Ayase were standing in the middle of the garden, facing each other. Ayase was wearing her pajamas. They seemed to be discussing something. The two of them didn't know each other, right?
なんか妙にシリアスに見えねえか。
They seemed to be glaring at one another. Suddenly, Ayase took a step forward and slapped Rimi across the face. Even from here, I could see that she'd given it her full strength. Now Ayase was walking away from Rimi. If she was heading towards the connecting corridor, she might come back to her room.
今ビンタしたよな。
I nodded. Rimi was standing there, alone. She wasn't moving.
あの二人ってトラブル抱えてんのか？
I hadn't heard anything like that at all. Misumi suggested we pretend we never seen it. I eagerly agreed. We decided to leave Rimi where she was and head to Ayase's room. I was feeling a lot better than I had a bit ago. The gaze of God was gone. That awful feeling had disappeared like it had never happened. Misumi let out a soft gasp. He was walking ahead of me. I looked up and saw Ayase heading towards us. She was looking down at her feet. She seemed sick and pale and was having trouble walking. Her expression seemed dark, too. We ended up running into each other right in front of her hospital room.
よ、岸本さん。
Ayase looked up in surprise at his cheerful greeting. And when she saw me, she gave me a smile that somehow made it look like she was about to cry. Why was she smiling just now? Because she'd heard about the mess at O-Front and how much of a fool I'd made of myself? Or did she just like me? If it was the former, that was incredibly depressing.
俺たち君のお見舞いに来たんだよね。つうか岸本さん、パジャマ姿も可愛いじゃん。
He was already using his pickup artist skills. Talk about being fast on your feet.
入って。
Ayase, for her part, wasn't nearly as cold as she'd been to him before. She opened the door and invited us in. She didn't mention the fact that she'd just slapped Rimi on the roof at all. I wasn't sure whether she was just hiding it or if she'd just totally gotten over it in this short of a time. As always, it was impossible to tell what Ayase was thinking.
やっぱ見舞いに来たのは正解だったぜ。今日は好感触だ。
Misumi gave me a little thumbs up, making sure Ayase couldn't see. He was panting a little as he went into the room. I followed him. I'd wanted to go home with Rimi, but I didn't have the courage to talk to her right now. I didn't know why it had happened, but if somebody had slapped her that hard, she must be feeling pretty bad, and I didn't have the words to make her feel better. Ayase sat down on the bed. Misumi sat down next to her, somehow managing to make it look natural in the process. I was astonished at his boldness. Seeing him go on the offensive was making me feel a little odd. Ayase gave him a glance before fixing her gaze on me. As she stared at me, I didn't know what sort of look I should have on my face. In the end, I decided to look at my feet.
怪我どう？もうだいぶ良くなってるみたいだけど。なんか必要なものあるなら遠慮なく言ってよ。俺がすぐ買ってきてやるぜ。
He was staring at her hand. Evidently, he was looking for a chance to grab it. Should I not be here?
あ、小説とか読む？俺さ、グラジオール記黙示録詩編ってのが好きなんだけど。岸本さん、知ってる？
匠。
Ayase ignored Misumi's question. Instead, she said my name.
君はグラジオールの7騎士の一人よ。
あ？
え？
There she goes again, even after her failed suicide attempt. Evidently, Ayase's personality hadn't changed.
やっぱり導きだったんだわ。君と私が出会ったのは。
She spoke softly, unemotionally. She began to share whatever crazy backstory she had in her head.
君の邪神はとても強大。だからこそ言うことなしなのよ。黒騎士としての素質は。君が今経験している苦しみはすべて神罰。大いなる意志による試練なの。それを乗り越えた時に理想度は召喚されるわ。君の手に必ず。そして現れるのよ。邪神の黒き大蛇。あらゆる崩壊を飲み込み、邪神王の身を砕くことのできる。同質にして異質なるものが。現実なの。グラジオールも理想度も。かまいたちがその証よ。実在しない現象は後世に言葉として残ることはないわ。知っている？語源を。かまえたち。それは理想度を意味しているの。信じて、匠。グラジオールを倒すのよ。一緒に。
Gladio? Now I remembered. I'd seen it when I first looked up the D-Sword. From what I'd read, the legend of the D-Swords originally came from old text and apocrypha about the legend of Gladiel, supposedly anyway. Misumi silently stood up and walked towards me. Alright, why don't we stop it there? This is audap. You've been watching Chaos Head Noah running on Nintendo Switch. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.